We screened Morning of the Earth for the first time in Manly Silver Screen Theatre, and it was a packed house to mostly friends and surfers and family, and we had no idea what we had. None at all. You know, I often have people come up to me that say, Morning of the Earth was a great film because, you know, when I saw that film, I was living the best part of my life. I was, you know, doing this and I was free and I had a great girlfriend and I was surfing. And then all of a sudden, they get caught in their business world or their careers. They get married, they have 4 kids, they get a mortgage, they get lost. And then some of them, 20 years later, step out of it and go back to the roots and the things that they loved. You know, the children have grown up, they've paid their mortgage off, their wife deserted them or whatever, and they're kind of back into, and they reassess their life values. And they recognise or realise that surfing was an important part for them. And, you know, they step back into it, something that happened for them during the Morning of the Earth period. And I've kind of stayed closer to it all the way. I didn't really get too far off the track.
Come on, fireman, mister, what's your name? Don't tell me about freedom, that's my game. If you don't fall in the line and don't make fame, but it sure feels good.
I was always interested in photography when I was young. I mean, I never had any formal training, but it was just something that I understood. I could always look at something and know, you know, what was the best angle. And then I met Bob Evans. He was a surfer and a filmmaker. Bob was really the first Australian surf film maker. You know, he made 13 feature-length films in his life. He toured all the films around Australia, roadshow them, did all the bookings, got people on the door, did all the marketing, and he showed us the first surfing film that I'd seen. And it was a fantastic film. It showed big waves on Sunset in Waimea. And that was it for me. You know, after that night, I was gone. That laid the foundations for me to become a filmmaker. I'd met Bob, and over the next 2 or 3 years I kept in touch with him. And very soon after that, he started Surfing World magazine. And as I developed my skills as a photographer and started taking pictures, still pictures of my friends, I'd occasionally sending some down. You know, then I had a photograph published, and a year or so later, I was in Sydney working in a photographic shop and a department store, and I was a salesperson behind the counter in this camera store. And Bob came in one day, and he said to me, I'm going up the coast next week filming, and we're taking up, you know, 2 or 3 surfers, you know, midgets coming. Would you like to come? I looked around and at everyone in this department store, and they were all like shop store dummies. It took me about 2 seconds to realise that I was going to make a major career change.
Load the car with boards and people and head on up the coast. But don't stop until we find a wave. We all feel fine when we see those lines peeling off the point time after time.
I originally came on board as a still photographer to help him with his magazine, Surfing World magazine. And over a period of time, because he would film while I was shooting stills, I became his assistant. So if he wanted me to sell advertising for his magazine, I did it. If he wanted me to take photos, I did it. If he wanted me to help him in the cinema, I'd do it, because I was just, you know, a young person who was keen.
The only thing we'll always do.
Really generous man. Well, great soul. And, you know, he was penniless in a way, but he was rich in spirit, because he loved surfing and he made a life out of it. So he was able to put up with hardships, but they weren't really hardships because he was doing what he enjoyed. And that's helped me a lot, you know, in decisions that I've made. You know, follow your heart, do the things you love. And that's what he did. I worked for Bob for a few more years, and then one time he couldn't go to Hawaii and asked me to go in his place. He came to me and said, here's a tripod, here's 5,000 feet of film, let's say you load the camera, here's a ticket, and in 36 hours I was on a plane with David Trelaw to Hawaii. We stayed in Hawaii about a month at the Makaha Shores apartments. And next door to our apartment was a young grommet called Sean Thompson. And we hung out on the beach there and went surfing every day. There was Sean and Midget Farrelly and a group of Hawaiian surfers who surfed there regularly. We had a lot of fun. We knew that this big swell was coming because they kept warning people. You know, there's a storm approaching, you know, level whatever it is, you know, big waves coming. So we're at Makaha and we're looking at these gigantic swells, you know, like biggest surf that hit there for 10 years. It was unbelievable. And the swell was still sort of moving in. It had peaked, but it was still coming in. And we were in this apartment block in Makaha on the 5th floor. So I'd set up my cameras, both cameras, the movie camera and the still camera, and this perfect panoramic view of Makaha. And all the surfers had got there, all the big wave surfers had come there and they were all hanging out there. And as the morning went on, the surf got bigger. You know, you have to give the surfers credit for being out there that day. I mean, I don't think any of the surfers that were in Makaha thought that it was going to get as big as it did. You know, they just went out there and the surf kept rising during the day. And these surfers gradually were washed in or came in, and there were 2 surfers out there, left out there. Greg Noll was one of them, and I think it was either Jose Angel or Fred Van Dyke, and they were riding 11'6" rhino chasers. Huge boards, no leg ropes, right? And, you know, they rode some big waves, and Greg Noll was, at that time, in peak condition and considered to be one of the, you know, strongest big wave surfers. But the wave that he caught, which was supposed to be the biggest wave ever ridden, wasn't. You know, I was up, because I was 4 stories up, you know, the light wasn't as intense. I was kind of on a bit of a side angle. And I shot stills of him on that wave. And it was, you know, a pretty solid wave, but, you know, wasn't as big as some of the waves that he's ridden at Waimea. The still photos for me look like, you know, I would say it's probably a 20, 25 foot wave. But because the surf got really big and they were washed in, and he did get a big wave or 2, it kind of, the story grew in time. The myth of it is, and the legend of him riding the biggest wave of all time sounds great. But, you know, nobody actually knew that I was filming, because usually you're on the beach with cameras, and everyone's looking around, but there were no cameras there. and I was kind of hidden away a bit in the veranda of this apartment. Soon after I got back from Hawaii, I was approached by David Elphick and John Witzig to start a surfing newspaper. John Witzig had been working on a magazine called Surf, and David had been working for a music newspaper called Go Set. So they said, come along and we'll start a newspaper. And I thought about it and I went, well, at the same time I was interested in making my own film. But I'd been working for Bob for a while and I'd seen how he promoted his films through Surfing World. So I left Bob and we started Tracks. There was a contest at Newcastle, a surfing contest, and we featured it in the first issue. On one side of the newspaper, there's this beautiful picture of a guy surfing. On the other side, right, side the ocean, is this steelworks spewing out pollution. And Tracks became a real, ecological, political statement. I mean, we had issues in there, really strong issues about, keeping the planet healthy. Environmental issues, political issues, which I think was one of the reasons it was really successful from the first issue. So once Tracks was up and running, I thought about making my own surfing movie. And I remembered something that happened when I was working for Bob Evans. I got connected to this group in Sydney called E.J. Dwyer, who were a publishing company for the Catholic Church. And I was employed by them to design this series of textbooks for school on social and moral issues. Anyhow, I met these two nuns in the process of doing this design work. Really lovely ladies. And one of them said to me, what do you want to do with your life? Which was really, left of field question. And totally unexpected. I said, I really want to make a surfing film, a really beautiful surfing film about the ocean. And she said, well, just go out and do it. And I did.
It was the morning of the earth. It was the morning of the earth. It was the morning of the earth.
It's like it was truly just made up as we went from day to day. We had no money, very little equipment, but a desire to make a film, a beautiful film about surfing.
Walking on a dusty road in the countryside of ease, I heard a song drifting on the gently blowing breeze. Sunshine through the autumn, sweet snow to the spring, corn by the water of an old mill stream. And you give me all, you give me all.
Usually we'd put a Tracks issue to bed, then we'd have a window of a week or 2 weeks, and if the surf was good, we'd bolt. Now, I travel up the coast with Stephen Cooney and David Trelaw. They were my buddies most of the time I was with them. Stephen, he was like a young, hot surfer. He was just a really, a young grommet. And David just came along because he was a good friend of mine. I loved surfing the point breaks on the north coast of New South Wales.
Day comes with its golden eye and warms me as I stumble to your shore. And I stop and I wonder why so many things about you I enjoy.
Surfing was fairly popular at that period of time, but it wasn't crowded. There were so many beaches we called into that were empty of surfers. beautiful little crystal clear water, beautiful little 3 or 4 foot waves, offshore wind. And we would just surf there, and if we felt like it, we'd sleep there. Light a fire, cook some food, wake up next morning, go surfing. Most of the time we surfed, very few people. It's like we were kind of in a world of our own. And then one time, David just decided he wasn't going back. We arrived at Angourie and it was so perfect and the waves were so good that he never left. It's like he found his Mecca. And to this day, he's still there. He rented that house at the back of Yamba. You could always rent these funky little farmhouses for a few dollars. They were kind of derelict almost, the houses. The farmers had lived there and then they just either died or moved on. So you get all these surfers go up there and they just hang out there, make surfboards there and go surfing. And that's where we met Chris Brock, Brocky, and he'd been living there for 6 months. And he was living at the back of Angourie in the next beach around, and he'd built this tree house. He'd wake up in the morning and then walk another 100 metres up there and he's at Angourie. Magic. These guys just found heaven and they stayed. And you've got to give them a big tick. People go chasing, rainbows and thinking the pot of gold's out there and getting involved with this, that and everything else. They just stopped and stayed there. And, he lived there. It cost him nothing to live in the tree house. Quiet, beautiful environment. Did what he loved. One morning I was at Kirra setting up the camera and Michael Peterson just paddled out. When he was out surfing, it was like he was talking to you. You could see exactly who and where he was coming from when he was on a board. And those few years that he was surfing at Kirra were like, that was his peak. That's when he was really expressive. And when he stepped off that board on the land, he was empty. After we'd been filming up the north coast of New South Wales, we decided to go to Hawaii and film the big surf in the winter over there. I took Terry Fitzgerald with me on that trip. Terry was known as Mr. Body Talk because he was so fit and such an incredible surfer. And this was the first time I'd seen Jerry Lopez surf, and he was the master. If there were like 20 or 30 or 40 surfers in the water and Jerry paddled out, it would just open up. Then Russell Hughes, who was a surfer at the time, had been travelling through Asia. And he met up with David Elphick and said, there's surf in Bali. And part of David's package when he left Go Set magazine to start Tracks was some Contra air tickets. So David said, well, let's go to Bali. We had no idea where to go, what to do. When we got out of the airport, we went, okay, well, we'll go to the village. We went to Kuta and it was just a village. There were no shops there. There were no tourists there. You know, a few hippies on the beach, but it was basically tourist-free. But it was right on the beach, you know, little beach breaks there, so we stayed there. Rusty Miller came along. He'd, you know, surfed the North Shore of Hawaii. He'd surf Big Wave, he'd surf Waimea Bay. But Stephen was like 15 years old, just out of school. So Rusty, because of his experience, was able to help and guide Stephen through the passage, and it worked out perfect for the film. Well, we stayed on the main beach because there was always a surf at Kuta. We always had waves there, but one day it got flat, and we went out to Uluwatu Temple, which was way out on the end of the headland. And there was this magic little 2-foot wave, 3-foot wave. Everything else was flat. And there's this perfect, crystal clear 3-foot wave just wrapping around the edge of the headland. No one there anywhere. So anyhow, a couple of days later, it came up on the beach. It was, you know, about 4 or 5 feet. So we said, okay, let's go. So we got a beamer, bought our supplies, got some eggs and, you know, got a little kind of picnic basket. And we went out there for the day and we walked across these fields and we walked along the cliff and there were these perfect waves. And it was 10 feet. It was just this mega surf and lines way out to sea. And then we found our way down through this cave, which was just insane, you know, a big open cave, and the water was coming up through the entrance, but you couldn't see out because it kind of curved. You had to paddle out through the cave, but you couldn't really see what was out there till you got out into the ocean. And then I went back up on the cliff and Stephen and Rusty paddled out. No leg ropes. We stayed in Bali a month and came back to Australia to a house at Wild Beach where we were editing the newspaper tracks. So downstairs was the tracks office, upstairs was where we lived, and then we had this garage up the back which had a room underneath it as well, and that's where I edited Morning of the Earth. Well, with the editing of Morning of the Earth, I wanted to cut it, and I'd never edited before. You know, I was really interested in overlays. I wanted to change all the colours. I wanted to have really, you know, long dissolves. You know, I wanted to do special effects and hello, you know, you want a special effects, so you'd go, okay, I want this, you know, dissolved here, and you'd take those 2 pieces of film into the laboratory in town. You'd say, now I want to have a, you know, there's the film I want to dissolve. So you give it to them, and 24 hours later you go back and they show you the dissolve. So, you know, it was a little frustrating, I tell you. But, you know, somehow when you look at it and you look at the effects that are in there and the colour changes, you go, how the hell did all that happen? Because it'd take you weeks just to do things that you can do in a split second now. I had to cut the film without music because we were creating an original soundtrack. So what I did is I cut long sequences, didn't fine-tune anything, and then we'd give those sequences to different bands. And then they would go away and use those sequences then to compose the music. David Elphick was really responsible. He knew that Wayne Thomas at that time was like a hot producer. And they were able to go, okay, let's talk to these people. So, they got in Tamam Shad, they were surfers. And Brian Cadd was a friend of Wayne Thomas. John J. Francis, who did Simple Ben. And David was a real marketing whiz kid. And because we had an original soundtrack, he cut a deal with 2SM, which was a really popular radio station with young kids. And it turned out to be a great deal for us because he did a partnership arrangement so that they helped market the film. And because we had an original soundtrack, they really pumped the music. And the music then became the vehicle for the success of the film.
But it's a start when you open up your heart. Try not to hide what you feel inside. Just open up your heart.
When it hit the radio station, it expanded and it got out to this next broader audience who were interested in the ocean and every summer, but they weren't surfers. And Open Up Your Heart got incredible airplay. And inside of 3 weeks, it became a #1 hit. And as soon as it went to #1, bang, we've got a surge. And we weren't ready for it. I mean, we had one print.
But it's a start when you open up your heart. Give your love to others. They become your brothers. When you open up your heart.
So we, got a couple other prints and we got 2 or 3 prints out. We'd book the theatres in town and in the suburbs and we'd show it and thousands of people would turn up. It just took off. It was unbelievable. I never, ever did it for money or success. It wasn't even on the radar screen. All I wanted to do is make a beautiful film about surfing. That's all I wanted to do. And, when it stepped into that area, it was as much a surprise to me as anybody. It really was a heartfelt film, and it was exactly how I wanted to live, and it captured the period of time of all those people. So even though I was ambitious and wanted to make films, I didn't lose sight of what we were doing and the lifestyle we were living.
I've always built my own surfing equipment. I began to apply what I saw in fish fins to my surfboard fins. The fins I'm building at present are high-aspect fins built to utilize laminar flow. Their most important advantage is their handling at high speeds.
What happened after we made Morning of the Earth is that David had this idea that we should go over to America and make this film on George Greenough. And then we'll use it as a support with Morning of the Earth, being the entrepreneurial thinker that he was, and we'll get another run out of Morning of the Earth the following summer because we can show 2 films. George was an eccentric, unusual character, and we went over to Santa Barbara, where George lived, in Montecito, and we'd go to George's place every day and film. It wasn't really a surfing film. It was about a surfer, an eccentric surfer, and he was making this boat called the Morning Light in his mother's backyard. As it went on, it started to drag on because George is George, and he doesn't have a time frame and he does things the way he does them, and a year went by and I was still there. Not only was I filming, but I was George's assistant. I'd be filming and he'd say, "Hey, Alby, can you pass me the hammer?" So I'd have to stop, go down there, and next thing I'm under the boat helping him sand the bottom of the boat, and so I was kind of piecemealing the film and being his assistant.
Our voyage had finally begun. Late in the afternoon, we found our first surf, and we were all anxious to get in the water. Nat and Richie's launchings from the boat were as different as their surfing styles. Following seafaring tradition, I was the last to leave the Morning Light. We had left the mainland behind and entered the realm of the ocean. The sun, the moon, the winds, and the sea were the elements that governed our new life.
The first 70 minutes was about him and launching the boat and his lifestyle, and we created the music for that. And then George tapped on the last 20 minutes of Inside the Barrel that he'd shot at Lennox Head with the Pink Floyd music. He'd already cut the film, and we didn't have much money. You know, Pink Floyd, they had Dark Side of the Moon on the charts. So David goes over to London with George's footage, and he phones up the manager of Pink Floyd, rents a theatre in London, and all the band members of Pink Floyd come in to the screening with their wives. And they recognise a creative opportunity, and they said, we'll give you the music, you allow us to run with the film, that'll be the price. All we ask is you make no edits in the music. And we got 22 minutes of Pink Floyd music free of charge, with Dark Side of the Moon #1 on the world charts. Great, David, you know. David Orphick and John Witzig left Tracks, and I ran it for about a year, and then I sold it and went travelling. So I went travelling for 10 years, and me and my brother went to India with an 8mm camera, and we filmed the Kumbh Mela, this crazy Indian festival. It was a Hindu festival, and it was one of the biggest gatherings of people on the planet. But it was a magnet for all these sadhus, holy men. They lived a fairly strict life, did yoga every day, lived in the mountains in the Himalayas, a lot of them. And then we went to Kashmir and we filmed the waterways up there. The most beautiful state you could travel to. It's like a garden state. You know, it was just something that you could float through as an observer and film. As a filmmaker, I was really interested, once I got into the cultural aspect of documentary filmmaking, in travelling to these areas and filming, you know, the culture, the dance, the music, and the religious activities of these festivals. And that led on to a series of 6 documentary programs on festivals of the Far East. I mean, once I started travelling to these countries, which were predominantly Hindu or Buddhist countries, other aspects of religion entered into my life. And it became much more appealing and interesting when I went to, say, Burma, for example, which is a Buddhist country, and was able to see how the society in Burma just integrated their religious philosophies and belief systems into day-to-day, moment-to-moment living. Whereas in the predominantly Christian Western world, it's like you can go and mess up with somebody 5 days a week and go to church and be forgiven. It's like it's a turn off, turn on situation. Whereas in a Buddhist society, it was constant. It was always there, and the same with in Hindu countries that I went to. And as a result of that, I just moved more and more into that area. And we really made Festivals of the Far East because I wanted to make a film on Tibet, on the Wesak Festival in Tibet. The Wesak Festival surrounds the Buddhist celebration of his birth, death and enlightenment. And every May on the full moon it's celebrated in a really sacred, secret valley in this area around Mount Kailash, which was way over on the western border of Tibet and had never been filmed before. When you drive up from Lhasa, you drive through the mountains, you climb and drop between 13 and 18,000 feet. So how many people on the planet are actually living at that altitude? Not many. So there's a subtle beauty and energy that exists in that area that no one else is exposed to. And you are, because you're there. The rest of the population of the planet is down there, with all the pollution and all their problems and all their mental diseases and everything else going on, and you're 3 miles above it. So already you're in an incredible atmosphere. Plus you've got this natural beauty. Plus you're with the Tibetans, who are a genuinely beautiful race of people. I mean, somebody once told me that if the entire population of the world disappeared and the only two races were left were the Tibetans and the Balinese, then the world would have a chance. And, you know, after being in both those countries, I have to agree. The Festivals of the Far East series was eventually expanded into a 12-part half-hour series called Festivals of the World. After the festival series, I somehow got connected to Chris Blackwell in 1992. Chris had started up a record label called Island Records, and the result of our coming together was my first surfing movie in 20 years. You can't step twice on the same piece of water. From there, I made a few more surfing pictures. I made Metaphysical with Bruce Raymond, who was working for Quicksilver, and he asked me if I'd be interested in going to G-Land to film the world's best surfers there, and off I went. From there, a few years ago, I made this film with Jeff Hornbaker called Globus. Jeff is a really good cinema photographer, and he was out filming all these incredible scenes in different parts of the world. So I helped him in the post-production and also inputted him with some of my footage that I'd shot in Tibet and India and various other parts of the world. And then he made this really beautiful film. It's not a surfing film, but it has surfing images in it. It's just really positive images about the planet and the natural beauty of the planet and the spiritual values that are encased in that natural beauty. I've been able to make certain decisions in my life and how I want to live in terms of making films. And the success of doing those things was actually in doing it. It wasn't the rewards that would come. That was never a consideration. Well, we used to run a wire centre here. It's a protection of animals that were in distress or damaged or hurt or run over on the roads. And we're a halfway house for them as a release centre because we have 60 acres here. It's yours. Look, eat as much as you like. There's so many biscuits, you won't run out, mate. All the wallabies were released here on the property. And the kangaroos, they just gravitate towards this place. You know, we slash it all the time. There's really good feed, so they're comfortable and feel at home. And they just live here. What I've been doing is archiving all my material. So I'm digitising all the material and getting it into a state where I can call upon it to do, if I want to call upon it to do book work or magazine work, or if I wanted to do, little snippets of films, I can just have all this really, modern technology at my fingertips here and live in the country environment and have all the beauty that the country environment has to offer, and at the same time have all this really high technology equipment to do whatever I want to do with it. And, if there's a blackout, then I just pick up one of my Outer Island boys and go for a surf. When I was making all the surfing pictures, it was like I'd be standing on the beach and these waves would be coming in and I'd be watching these waves and, everyone would be surfing and I'd be laying the camera up and filming. The morning of the Earth, I filmed everybody up and down the coast and went to Bali. I don't think I even surfed in Bali, When we were over there, I was filming the first time. So I decided something's not right here. You can go searching everywhere in the world for, the meaning of life. It's right here and it's right inside you. And the closest you get to actually tapping into that is riding a wave. Just paddle out. Don't go into competitions. Steer clear of corporate branding and have fun. Give the best wave in the water to your friend. That's what I reckon. And once you can do that, you've mastered it.